rejection, and resiliency. And really, what better time to be talking about this with the midterm elections this past week? We had prime examples of rejection and resiliency. We had several multi-term candidates who were voted out of office and talk about rejection. There's no way to sugarcoat that kind of rejection. It's not a matter of we used a different firm because your firm's pricing was too high, or we used a different firm because my brother-in-law went with them. This is really just about them. We don't like you. We don't like what you stand for. But these are also politicians, and politicians are resilient. And in talking about resiliency, we also have a prime example of resiliency. And putting all politics aside, we have President Obama with the Democrats routed and the world looking at him. How is he going to deal with it? And what does he say? He says, I'm not mopey. This energizes me. And, you know, some of that is spin, but some of that is just drawing on his own stores of resiliency. You cannot be president without being resilient. And you cannot be a robust rainmaker in today's world without being able to deal with rejection and to pull on your own stores of resiliency. And that's what we're doing this morning, is talking about how to move from rejection to resiliency. Fortunately, we have some great counselors, advisors, and strategists to talk with us this morning, both of whom have decades of experience working with lawyers and other professionals in terms of business development strategy, techniques, and tools. David Ackert is president of the Ackert Advisory and founder and developer of Practice Boomers, a unique online technology which facilitates professionals' business development. And Craig Brown is principal consultant with the Law Vision Group. He is a former attorney and also is the co-developer of the Lawyer Behavior Profile, which helps lawyers identify their key business development strengths. Law Vision Group also happens to be the driver behind one of the best legal marketing conferences around, the annual Rain Dance Conference, which in 2015 will be held June 10th and 11th in Chicago. Definitely worth a trip, something you want to consider. And I am Sharon Berman, principal of Berbay Marketing and Public Relations. We create the visibility and credibility that fuel revenue growth. Good morning, David and Craig. Glad to have you.
Good morning.
Okay. Let's talk about today's environment. First of all, I wanted to remind everybody to please submit questions, and we'll be taking those at the end of the webinar. Okay. We all know what a stressful and competitive environment it is today, whether you're a lawyer, CPA, another financial services professional. Clients have so many more outsourced alternatives. We're all facing pricing pressures, whether it's alternative fee arrangements, whether it's just cut your price or I'll go somewhere else. There's so many more moving parts in marketing, and a lot of practice areas are still feeling or emerging from the impact of the recession. It's just a different world today than it was even 3 or 5 years ago. And when we talk with our clients and prospects, a lot of times what we hear, or the sense that we get, is that they feel alone, or they feel that in many ways their own resistance or reluctance to develop business is personal to them, and maybe that others are having a much easier time. I'm not sure. I think there's not as much reality to that as they're considering. And Craig, can you tell us a little bit about what a rainmaker's qualities are and what we're dealing with, what are the innate personality is, let's say, of a lawyer or another professional, and what the gap is?
Yeah, sure. These statistics and this data comes from Dr. Larry Richard, who studies lawyer personalities. And if you want to check him out, he's at lawyerbrainblog.com. Really good information, and he's been kind enough to share this information. This information has been around a while, and some people on the call may have heard it before. But what we've found is that there are two key innate qualities that rainmakers have. And essentially what's happened here is testing was done, caliper testing was done of a large sample of lawyers, and then they went back and looked at that sample and said, of those that we tested, who are the ones that are building the most revenue at their firms? And are there any characteristics or qualities that are common to each of those people? And two that jumped off the page are called ego drive and resilience. So ego drive is defined as the desire to persuade others for the sheer joy of persuading others. So each of you on the call probably know someone like this. It has in the past sometimes been called the brother-in-law quality. So picture your annoying brother-in-law at Thanksgiving dinner, and he's sitting across from you, and he won't shut up until you agree with him that his basketball team is better than yours, or that the gravy's always better in the South, or the pizza's always better in New York. The difference between
the pizza always is better in New York.
That's right. Someone on the call with ego drive. So the difference between the annoying brother-in-law and the veteran rainmaker is typically when you leave the room from a veteran, you feel as if you've come to a conclusion on your own. You don't feel as if someone's convinced you, right? So David and I walk out of the room and say, we really should catch a flight to New York and get some pizza. So that's right. Ego drive. The other one is resilience. Resilience is defined as the ability to bounce back from criticism or rejection. Most lawyers don't have a lot of resilience, which causes difficulty with business development, which we'll talk about. But those that are rainmakers test high in resilience. Salespeople that sell small items have a lot of resilience, right? That's why people call me and ask me if they want to, if I want my carpets cleaned. And I say, no, thank you, please take me off the list. The reason they call me is they know for every 99 people that say no, thank you, the 100th person says, oh, we were sitting here just waiting for someone to call and see if our carpets could be cleaned, and they get a sale. They take a lot of no's knowing that a yes will come. The classic example of this, of resilience, comes from the movie Dumb and Dumber. Many of you probably remember this movie. Lloyd Christmas is the protagonist. He has a love interest. Her name is Mary. He comes to Mary and he says, what are the chances that we'll one day end up together? And she says, they're not good. And Lloyd says, not good like 1 in 100? And Mary says, well, it's more like 1 in a million. And then Lloyd Christmas says the signature line of the movie, so you're saying I've got a chance. That's a classic resilient. Always, whenever no comes his way, he feels like there's always a possibility that something good could come from it. And that's something that most lawyers don't have. So that's qualities of rainmakers. I think it would be instructive to look at qualities of personality traits of lawyers in general. And these are lawyers, and I know there are some people on the call that are not lawyers but are also professional service providers. And I think these can apply in a lot of different categories. So you can see that skepticism and autonomy are very high, 90 and 89%. This is, skepticism is one of the reasons why people hire lawyers. They don't take the status quo for granted. They're willing to take an argument and argue the other side of it. I did have one lawyer once, when I presented these statistics in the back, say, 90%, that's too high. That can't be right. So I think sometimes these are self-fulfilling. Take a look at sociability. Sociability very low. In this case, sociability doesn't mean lawyers or professional service providers don't like to socialize. It means they don't want to open up the innermost part of their hearts. We don't share personal things. Abstract reasoning is high, urgency is high, and as we discussed, resilience is quite low. So with that background, I think that can help us understand fears that lawyers have. I think that if we'll switch to the slide on fears, I think you can kind of nail these down into a couple of different categories. In our workshops, when we ask lawyers and marketers to identify obstacles, barriers to engaging in business development, the number one answer across the country is time. That's the biggest obstacle. But once you get past that obstacle, almost all the others that they list have to do with specific fears they have. It has to do with their personality, and areas that concern them. We've kind of distilled those down into these 4 areas: fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of interaction, and fear of success. And so we kind of want to use that as an outline, and we've got some information to deal with each of these fears and also fears in general.
Craig, I just want to take a minute and add one nuance, if I may. I think that sometimes when service professionals look at this idea of business development or selling, there's also a stigma around it. I don't want to come off as a pushy salesman. I don't want to come across as somebody who's overbearing or come across as that person who, called me and tried to sell carpet cleaning services. And so there may be a fear of embarrassment somewhere in there as well to consider, and perhaps we can touch on that. And then I also think, this word fear, it's a big word. It's sort of it's a primal word. We don't necessarily even recognize it as fear sometimes. I know in my own business development pursuit, I don't feel afraid. Like, I'm not quaking in my boots. I'm not, breathing shallow and somehow shaking as I pick up the phone. It just feels more like I don't want to do it. Or it feels like I'd rather do this other thing instead. And so sometimes fear can come in a package, or it can come disguised in such a way that we don't actually recognize what it is when it's happening, but it still influences our behavior and drives us away from it in the same way that fear would. So I think it's just important to approach this from a few different angles so that as many people on the call as possible can relate to it, because not everyone may look at that word fear and actually be able to connect that to their experience when it comes to their resistance to pursuing business.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's really not. It's really not fear in many cases. It's just a lack of motivation to do something because there is an underlying fear, though. But you don't recognize it as such. You just don't pick up the phone or make that call or reach out and extend your hand to someone at an event.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess what my reaction was when you talked about the number one obstacle being time is, once again, not making, okay, we're all busy. I get that. But, the obstacle of not making the time because of the underlying aspect or fear or resistance or reluctance. I think you could look at it with the chicken and the egg. Okay, so look, the reason we're on this call today is because there are solutions. We know that people overcome these, and what we want to be talking about is how do we handle this? How do we manage it? How do we tame this beast and get our hands around it and make it work for us? Craig, do you want to talk a little bit about if we break one of the fears down into rejections?
Yeah, I think that in terms of the fear of rejection, that fear of someone telling me no, that lack of resilience, one of the things, the strategies we've employed is just helping professional service providers understand that really this is not a failure. If someone says no, it's not a failure. It's part of the process. And because many times lawyers are not used to being told no and don't like being told no, they believe that when they're told no, it's a failure. But if they look at business development as really matching capabilities with needs rather than convincing somebody of something, right? Many lawyers are trained in how to convince someone, how to make an argument. And really, business development is not so much about convincing someone. It's more about matching things. So you're matching the capabilities of the firm, the capabilities of the lawyer, with the needs and interests of a potential client. And if you look at it that way, it helps them to be okay with the fact that, hey, we didn't match up. They didn't have a specific need that we covered. That's fine. Someone else got that business. Let's go out and find someone who does have a need that we can really help.
That's interesting. I can see how that could alleviate a lot of the, for lack of a better word, fear or resistance or reluctance. David, I know that you've talk a lot about self-talk and managing self-talk. What are your thoughts in this area?
Well, I think that this is a very interesting landscape, because the truth is that we have a conversation with ourselves before we have a conversation with a prospective client or a referral source or whoever it is that we need to interact with in order to develop business. And we don't necessarily recognize that. But we are all 24 hours a day, even when we're sleeping, having some sort of dialogue with ourselves. Now, when we go to sleep, it becomes a subconscious dialogue. It gets kind of random. But right now, in this moment, you're saying something to yourself. It might be, oh, that's not true, I disagree with him. Or it might be, this webinar is actually turning out better than I thought. Or it might be, that picture is kind of weird. Why is that woman looking herself? Or that might be, oh, I get it. It's the self-talk thing. Oh, yeah, okay, understood. Right? You're always having some sort of commentary about everything. And it's just part of our inner monologue, if you will. It's part of being human. And that self-talk is generally what precedes the actions that we take that will lead to an interaction with another person. So for instance, it might be, gosh, there's this prospective client who expressed some interest in my services. I don't know, we met at a ball game, or we met at a networking event, or whatever it was, and they said I should really give them a call and that they'd be interested in potentially engaging me for this or that. So I sent them an email, and I haven't heard back from them. Now, the story I'm telling myself in my head, the self-talk that I have going is, well, should I send them another email? I mean, I don't want to seem desperate, and I don't want to be a pest. And I mean, it's only been 3 days. Maybe I should wait 6 days. I mean, what's the rule? Maybe I should wait 2 weeks. So that's too long. Then they're going to forget about you. So we're constantly running this inner monologue that is either reinforcing action or reinforcing resistance. And most of it's reinforcing resistance because we have this inner need to be safe, right, to survive, to protect ourselves. So there's this kind of new agey concept that people throw around a lot, like affirmation. It's sort of, I think I can, I think I can. And it's where you start to produce self-talk that will motivate you into taking action. But I'm here to tell you that, at least from my personal experience, affirmations alone are not effective. Me telling myself, oh, I'm a really good business developer, if I know in my heart that I'm not, is not going to get me to be a better business developer. That's just going to start an inner monologue where I'm arguing with myself. No, I'm not. Just look at the last time. I totally botched that. And then, yes, you are. Stop talking like that to yourself. I mean, you can sort of crazy making. So I think what's really important to kind of take away here from this concept of, if you are going to use affirmations or self-talk and try to sort of shift your attitude and get a positive focus, a positive attitude going toward business development, which I think is important, you've got to combine it with action. You can't just tell yourself, I'm a good business developer, without giving yourself some very small, achievable next step that you can take so that you have evidence around it. And then you're actually pointing to something that is real and something that you can believe, because talk is cheap, even when it's self-talk. So that's sort of the point I wanted to make to that.
So can you give us a little bit of an example in terms of, you're saying, is it the combination of the talk and the action? Is it the action enough? I mean, can you give us a little bit more specifics there?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that we can do as we're managing our self-talk is psyching ourselves up to take just one small action, one 3-foot toss, as it were. You sort of drop the ball into the bin right in front of you rather than get a half-court swish. Because when you can start to point to little successes, and that little success might just be, look, I'm not willing to pick up the phone and call this person, so I'm going to send them an email. Or I'm not even willing to email them, but I am willing to draft out the email that I would send if I were to send it, right? So something that is really achievable and very reasonable, it is still momentum toward the action, as opposed to just being stuck and then trying to psych yourself up and tell yourself that you have more capability than you really have. Wherever you are on the spectrum is fine. You just want to make sure that you're always taking some step forward, even if it's a baby step. And then you'll find that that bolsters the confidence and starts to turn the positive attitude, the self-talk, the affirmation, whatever you want to call it, into something that you'll actually buy into.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
I think a good example of self-talk is the next slide under fear of failure. There's a famous movie, many of you have probably seen, Chariots of Fire, and it tells the story of Harold Abrams, who is the 1924 Olympic champion in the 100 meters. And there's this scene in the movie where he's training, and in his training he loses a race, and he enters into this period of self-doubt, and he has this famous negative self-talk. He says to his girlfriend up in the stands, I don't run to take beatings, I run to win. If I can't win, I won't run. And his girlfriend wisely turns to him and says, well, Harold, if you don't run, you can't win. And I think lawyers engage in this kind of self-talk. They are generally accustomed to success, and they don't want to veer from the world that they've mastered that has given them success. So when you present something different, like business development, which is very different than practicing law, then they enter into this unfamiliar world. So it exposes them to failure. And one of the things we found that helps with this, and I think this ties in to what David was saying about action, try and help them to see that there's something familiar about what they're doing. Tie it to the familiar. So if you take a look at this list, it's a list of lawyer activities: preparing for meetings, spotting issues, asking questions to uncover facts, analyzing implications, suggesting solutions to problems. These are all lawyer skills.
I would say probably professional services skills also. I mean, in terms of the CPAs and that, listening and.
Yeah, if you're an architect or an accountant or any of those, these are skills that will tie into anything that you're doing, right? If you've been successful in a professional services field, you know how to do these things. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is, if you were to sign up for a correspondence course of, the Acme School of Sales, they would tell you to do the exact same thing. Before you go to the meeting, prepare, spot issues, find out what the needs are, ask questions that are going to uncover what the issues are, what the needs are, what the problems are, and analyze the implications of not solving those problems, and then suggesting to the person you're talking to that you may have a solution to the problem and helping them solve that problem. The lawyering skills and the sales skills are fairly similar. So when you have someone that has that fear of failure because they're worried about coming out of their world and going into an unfamiliar one, show them the similarity. Show them that the thing you want them to do is something they already know how to do. And I think that can help you get to the action that David's talking about.
And David and Craig, what is the reaction? I mean, is there an aha moment? What is it because really, and I don't mean, it's sort of in a sense when you look at this, you go, oh yeah, that's fairly obvious in a sense. I mean, but it's obvious in terms of what somebody might be doing if they're in a selling capacity, but it's not so obvious when you say this is exactly what you do every day. What is the reaction you usually get to this?
Well, the reaction that we usually get is, we in a coaching scenario, we have the opportunity to explain how to do something, get buy-in from the person that we're coaching, and then they get a chance to go practice. They go off, and then the next coaching meeting that we have with them, we review it. How did that go? What happened? Did what we say was going to happen happen? Did something else happen? And they get a chance to try it. Usually the reaction is pretty good when they come back and realize, hey, this is really simple stuff. It's not complex. It's just a matter of learning something I haven't done before, tying it to something I know how to do, and going out and trying it. What have you found, David?
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that's absolutely right. We see that as well. I think the important kind of point that I would want to underscore here is that this slide and these bullets that you've put on the screen make a lot of sense intellectually. And that intellectual shift is necessary in order for the self-talk to start to sound different. So the self-talk goes from, well, I simply can't do that, or, I'm not that archetype. I'm a lawyer, or I'm a CPA, or I'm a professional. I'm not a salesperson. So that's the thing that they're telling themselves. And then they'll see a slide like this, or they'll hear a distinction or a new concept or a way of reframing it, and they'll start to say, oh, well, maybe I don't have to think that way. And then once you have a little bit of an opening there, a little bit of attitudinal kind of flexibility, then the key is to tie it to some reasonable action, like we've talked about. And Craig, you mentioned, giving them something to do and holding them accountable for the coaching, so that when they come back and report in, they've been able to hopefully move the needle. A lot of times what will happen is, as we all know in coaching dynamics, is that they'll come back and they'll say, yeah, I meant to do that thing that I was supposed to do, but I got busy, or this client matter came up and it's just I'm underwater, or I don't know, I got distracted because of whatever. So there's a story or an excuse that will come up. And again, that's not to say that people are not busy. Like you said, Sharon, everybody's busy, and that's a reasoning or an excuse that's very easy to sort of pull to. But the fact of the matter is that there just wasn't enough willpower to accomplish this thing in the face of everything else that was going on. And a lot of times that is, again, because we are disguising our fear and sort of packaging it up in something that's going to sound very rational and very reasonable. But at the end of the day, it just comes down to the result. Did the thing happen or didn't it? And if it didn't, then maybe we need to tweak it. Maybe we need to make it simpler. Maybe we need to make it more reasonable. Maybe we need more conversations like the slide in front of you so that we can gain more attitudinal flexibility, because until you're at a place where you can actually take one step, a small step, whatever that small step is for you, then you're in a place that is stuck, and ultimately you're not going to be able to take the momentum that you're looking for.
So one of the go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, please. I was just going to ask. Just go ahead. Go ahead, Craig.
Well, I was just going to say that I think that in coaching circles we've found that you kind of have to pick your battles, right? There are some things that you can help with. You can help someone overcome fears. There are some things people are just not built for, and they never will be. And if you ask them to go out and do those things, it frustrates them, right? It's like asking them to go out and mow the grass with a pair of scissors. Eventually the job gets done, but the person doesn't want to do it again, and it doesn't look that great. And I'll give you an example of this. Think about people at your firms, those on the call. Think about yourself. Think about people that you help. There's a certain personality type that we encounter often when we're coaching, and I coach primarily lawyers, but I think this applies in a lot of professional services settings. Think of the person that's fairly quiet. They're not very social. They're known as a good lawyer. They work hard. They come up with creative solutions to problems. They're methodical, reserved, organized. They're academic. And the kind of person that says to you, doing good work ought to be enough. And because of that, they're fairly aloof about going out and finding new business because they're pretty good at what they do. When you're with this person in a social situation, they're often uncomfortable, so they'll revert to talking about work, right? And this person doesn't have that many contacts. Taking that person and forcing them into a networking room is literal hell for that person, and sometimes for the people surrounding that person in that room. There's an interesting side to that personality type. This is the classic social introvert, right? But the flip side of that person is they're very perceptive people. They're listeners. If you're to take a person like that and put them into a meeting for an hour, they may not say a word, but they'll come out of that meeting and they will know the underlying hidden agenda of everyone else in the room. They're very perceptive. They don't have a lot of contacts, but the contacts that they do have they tend to be very deep, strong, loyal relationships. So that person can be very successful in some contexts and not in others. And part of the process of helping them is to figure out, well, what activities do work for that person, right? You should, in coaching a person or helping a person like that, you should start with existing relationships rather than start telling them about how they need to build new relationships. They're probably better on boards and committees than they are in a networking room. They're probably better focused on writing and publishing, and they're the type of people that like to check things off the box. So they're good with clearly defined goals and tasks. So I believe that some of the things we're talking about, it's okay to give them permission to run from that fear, because in some cases you're not going to be able to do anything with that fear. It is what it is. And the good news is there's so many types of activities they can engage in. You can direct them to an area that's going to help them.
So what you're saying
I think
basically
it's also
is you
important to, sorry Sharon, I just want to make one
No, go
point
ahead,
here. I think
please,
it's also
go ahead.
important to help them understand that comparison is it is not going to be a useful way of thinking when it comes to this particular topic. What I mean by that is that introvert, or really any personality type, can look around the firm at the Rainmakers and say, well, I mean, just look at so-and-so. He or she walks into the room and they work the room and, you know, they're the life of the party. Or just look at so-and-so. They have this way of blogging that is just so infectious. I could never write like that. Or just look at so-and-so. You know, they manage to just build this great network through whatever networking group or trade association they belong to. So it's very easy to draw comparisons and then position that such that you come up short if, in fact, you know, in your experience, you just haven't been able to develop business like that other person. So I think this is a really important point that Craig is making, because it's, you know, Craig and I have seen this over the many years we've been doing this, that even the introverts can find their way through this maze, but they probably won't take the same route that somebody else took through it, even another introvert. So there is a lot of trial by error, and that takes us back to this concept of resiliency. You know, business development requires a lot of experimenting. I tried it this way, it didn't work, but I did learn this one lesson, and I'm going to take that with me and try it a different way now. And if you have that willingness, that patience, that persistence to, you know, just try different avenues, you will find your way through the maze. There is a way for everyone, I believe. It just comes down to whether or not the person has the tolerance for that exercise.
And so what I think you're both saying is what we preach also, in terms of you have to play to your strengths. I mean, if somebody's afraid of public speaking and would rather give you their right arm than stand up in front of an audience, then you don't push them in that direction. You know, you say, well, write an article, or let's look for something else. So I think that's a very, very important thing in terms of this is challenging enough anyway, so you don't want to be, you know, going in an area where there's already a lot of resistance. Okay, what about dread? Another fear that people are often talking about. How do you know? What are your thoughts, or how do you advise people in terms of dealing with this?
Well, dread is really just one form of what we've been talking about, but it typically occurs just before an event. So, for instance, let's say, you know, you've been instructed or advised or coached or whatever's going on at your firm to, you know, make a phone call to a specific person, or to carve out an hour a week to do some outreach or whatever it might be. The moment before that event, you're going to have some sort of experience emotionally if it's just not something you're looking forward to. And for me, it feels like dread, right? And what's happening, you know, I've done a lot of sort of self-reflection and talked to a lot of different people. I have a master's in psychology, so we've really looked closely at what is this concept of dread, what's really going on here, and what is it that stops people from moving forward, and typically results in procrastination, right? If I dread something and I don't want it to happen, I don't want to do it, I'm going to come up with 9 other things that I can do before that thing, and hopefully they will derail me to the point where I don't ever have to have that negative experience. So I'll answer email, I'll make myself another cup of coffee, I'll chit-chat with somebody in the hallway, whatever. I'm going to try to forestall this thing that I'm dreading from happening. And maybe, you know, if I'm lucky, I'll look at my watch and say, oh my goodness, it's 6 p.m. already, and I never got around to that phone call. Well, I guess we'll do it tomorrow. And, you know, on and on we push, right? So I think the key here is to really look at what's happening when that experience dread starts to surface. And what I've noticed is that there is an analysis, an intellectual analysis that accompanies the emotion. And that analysis is similar to what Craig was talking about earlier. You're looking at, all right, well, what's the worst case scenario that could happen here? And that's a very natural kind of analysis, especially among lawyers or any skeptical, intelligent service provider whose clients hire them to give them guidance through difficult situations. You know, they're basically saying, hey, service provider, tell me what I should be looking out for. And service providers get very good at saying, well, you could get audited by the IRS, or, oh, you could get sued, or, you know, whatever it is. You could lose all your money. So service providers have strengthened that muscle, and then they turn it on themselves, and they say, well, what if I pick up the phone, and worst case scenario, I pick up the phone, I call this person, and they are really irritated that I've called them at the office, or they have no interest in working with me, and they end up giving me an earful about it. Or even worse, they're just outright dismissive and disrespectful. I really don't want to have that experience. And that is the worst case scenario. I mean, I can't imagine something even worse than that. I get hit by a comet as I'm picking up the phone. But within the realm of reality, right, that's the worst case scenario. And we go there because we're trained to go there. And that keeps us from taking the action. But what we don't do is run all the way through the rationale that we've begun, right? Because if we're going to fantasize at one extreme with the worst case scenario, let's fantasize at the other side too. What's the best case scenario? I mean, if we're going to do a thorough analysis, we have to do a balanced one here. So what's the best case scenario? Best case scenario is we catch them just at the right time. They're so glad that we called. They were just thinking about us, and they had lost our phone number, and they have something that they need us to jump on right away, and it's a significant piece of work, and boy, is this working out. That's the best case scenario. And I think you will find, if you really take a look at the likelihood of these two things, that they're about the same. It is just as unlikely that when you call them, you get an earful or they are somehow dismissive or disrespectful, as it is that when you call them, lightning strikes and it's a perfect match. So then if you run this analysis all the way through the most likely scenario, here's what's probably going to happen. You're going to call, you're going to leave a voicemail. You're going to call, their assistant is going to tell you that they're out to lunch or that they're not available to speak right now and can they take a message. Or you're going to send an email and they're going to sit on the email for 2 weeks and then maybe you'll send another email and they'll send one back and say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, I let this slip through the cracks. Yes, let's resume our dialogue. But that's the most likely scenario. And when we actually get all the way through from worst to best to most likely, the action is a lot easier and the dread disappears. But if we get stuck on worst case scenario and we don't think any further than that, then stuck is where we stay. And I will say that people who have developed that muscle of being critical, of seeking out liabilities on behalf of their clients, have a very weak muscle called best case scenario. It's almost impossible for a lot of the lawyers I know to even fathom what a best case scenario would look like because no one ever asks them for that. And so they just haven't developed their creativity or their imagination in that direction. And so, of course, they have a very imbalanced analysis or assessment of how things might proceed.
That's very interesting. So, and it is a lot of this is a matter of practice and exactly what you're saying, experimenting and seeing, seeing where things come out. But it really is. I like that analogy of the muscle. What happens when really it does work, and people are really afraid of this fear? Afraid. It's a fear of success. What do you hear surrounding that, and how do you help your clients deal with it?
Well, one thing we do, I guess I should back up. One of the things that I think we should point out is, and I love David's best case, worst case scenario focus. But it's important to point out that someone may be on the line today saying, well, that's easy for you to say, right? You're all marketers. This is hard for me. But it's not the case. I mean, everybody goes through this. I mean, just take the example of calling someone that you're not sure about, you're not sure how they will receive you, or making an uncomfortable call. Everybody goes through that dread of, oh, this is hard, and then they start thinking of other things to do. It's very common. It's not just amongst professional service providers. There's no one category of people that never go through this. This is common to everybody. Marketers, salespeople, lawyers, accountants, architects, all kinds of people have this same problem. And I really like the way David lays it out. If you look at what's the worst going to happen, what's the best going to happen, and what's most likely to happen, it's not that big a deal, and you can move forward and take action.
Right.
One of the good examples, I think, of dread that I've seen in my practice that I think is a real problem is this problem of capacity. So, one time one of my clients said, Craig, my biggest fear is that if I do everything you tell me to do, I'll actually get another client. And if I get one more client, I swear to you I'm going to commit malpractice because I have absolutely no bandwidth to take somebody else on. And I hear this a lot. The first thing to focus on in this problem is it real or is it made up? And I've seen both. I've seen lawyers who really are using that as an excuse with me. You kind of have to ferret that out and say, let's talk about what you can do and what you can't do. But I have been with practices where they're just completely to the wall. I have a practice right now. I'm working with real estate hospitality practice. I guess they're building a lot of hotels in this country because this firm is going crazy. And one of the people told me this. I can't do this anymore. And this is a real thing. And if you have that real fear and you find that there really is a capacity issue at the firms, and right now, when you look at all the statistics, most firms still have open capacity. They still have more people than they have work to do. But there are pockets in firms that are the reverse, where they have more work than they have people to do. And because they've frozen hiring, there are people who are really, really working hard right now. And when you have that issue, you really have to go out and figure out and resolve the fundamental issue of capacity. Go hire me an associate before they can move forward. However, there are some things you can do in the meantime. And so when we have this capacity issue, we back up and say, all right, you're not going to ask a closing question. You're not going to bring someone on. But as you know, it takes a long time to get a client. So why don't we keep going with some of the other things we're doing? Let's continue to build relationships. Let's continue to have meetings. Let's continue to get the word out about our practice and who we are and what we do. And we'll ask people for business as soon as we know we have capacity issues taken care of. So that's one fear of success, is capacity. There's a flip side too, and that is kind of this aloofness that happens. This fear of success. Some people act as if they don't want to do business development. They don't want to admit that they aspire to going out and finding work, because for some professionals it's seen as an admission that they aren't good enough to get business on the merits of their work alone. If I have to go ask you for business, I must not be as brilliant as I made everybody think that I was. And this is more prevalent than you might think. There are certain people I come across, they're just very aloof about the whole concept of business development. And I think for many of them it stems from this idea that if I try, it means that it doesn't come naturally to me. And I think you need to be aware of that that phenomenon and ferret out when someone is that way, whether it's based on an underlying fear of success.
Interesting. Okay. In our conversation before this webinar, we were talking a little bit about how to really focus in. I mean, this can be such a business development, rainmaking can be such a broad category, and we've talked about several ways to sort of break it down. We were talking a little bit about targets and how to make business development more manageable by real focused targeting. David, do you want to tell us a little bit about what, recap our conversation and talk a little bit about targets?
Yeah, sure. So it ties back into some of the things that we've been talking about, having some sort of goal, making it really reasonable, making it something that's highly achievable, not too ambitious. So the idea behind targets is simply this. If you set some sort of metric into your routine, like I'm going to send out, 2 emails a day or 20 emails a day or 2 emails a week, it doesn't matter. This is not about, winning a race. But set some sort of metric goal for yourself. Then the focus shifts from, oh my gosh, I've got to do this business development, to I've got to hit my targets. And you will choose which 2 emails you send based on the mood that you're in, how resilient you're feeling in that moment, what kinds of opportunities you have in front of you, whatever it might be. But at the end of the day, there is value in just hitting the targets, because a lot of this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's really just about making sure you're constantly moving the needle. And as I pointed to earlier, if you're the person now who was able to hit their targets for a full month, even if those targets were fairly cosmetic in terms of the business result that they're likely to bring back into your firm, still, you're the person who hit their targets for a month. That is an achievement. That's something that you can take a step forward into and then move on from there. So I'm a big believer in targets. It almost gamifies this whole idea of business development. Our firm has just launched a CRM tool because I think that tracking these targets and being able to organize oneself around their targets is also really critical. So I am such a believer in this that we're really making significant investments in terms of our own company and making these kinds of things available to people, because I think without some way of, and even if it's just a Post-it note next to your monitor, some list you're ticking off, without some way of keeping track of what it is that you're doing and are you doing it consistently, this whole notion of business development can become this ethereal fog. Gosh, I don't know, I had lunch with somebody a couple of weeks ago. Will that go anywhere? I'm not sure. They said they'd keep me in mind. I said I'd keep them in mind. Who knows if we will? I mean, it gets really fuzzy. And that, I think, makes it even more complicated to traverse through it. So the more you have targets, the more you have clarity around what it is that you're trying to accomplish, I think the more accomplished you will feel as you move through it.
Just to comment on that, I think targets also bring courage. One of the interesting conversations I had once with a VP of sales, I talked to him about quotas that he had for his salespeople and how he divided up the quota that he received, that the company wanted to hit, the numbers the company wanted to hit to get their revenue. And he said that if you added up the quotas that he gave to his salespeople, it doesn't necessarily add up to the quota that he received or the quotas that the company, the numbers that the company wants to hit. And I asked him why that was, and he said because the quota for the salesperson is not about hitting a revenue target. The quota is about empowering and giving courage to the salesperson, because if they have that quota, then when they have to make that call, it empowers them. It gives them courage to make one more call, do one more thing, because they know they're trying to hit a target. And I think that can be applied in that situation.
The targets bring courage. That's right. I like that. David, do you just want to, I don't think everybody on the webinar understands what CRM is. Do you want to just take a minute and explain what that is?
Sure. It's essentially a software that helps people prioritize the relationships or the business opportunities that they're pursuing. A lot of times CRM will also send you an email reminder so that it's top of mind. Hey, you were going to follow up with so-and-so. Don't forget to do that. Sometimes it'll assign you a score based on how well you're doing, and that way you can kind of beat your own score. So again, there's that piece to which it becomes kind of a game, or what they call gamification. Some CRM is very complicated. They'll give you financial projections, and they'll give you a sense of, how much you're likely to bring in next year based on last year's performance and so on. Others are much simpler. The one we're doing is very simple. Different strokes for different folks. But the idea is simply that we have the technology now to be able to support these kinds of endeavors in very sophisticated ways. And so, that doesn't mean everybody has to throw out their Excel spreadsheet and adopt some software tool that is more robust, but there certainly are things out there that can be very useful. If you just Google CRM, you'll get a whole bunch of different, different options to explore.
Okay, great, thanks. And then last but not least, we want to talk about accountability, which is, I think it's one of the most powerful things that you can have when it comes to business development. And David and Craig, I know you've both had a lot of success with this. It's really what you do in a sense. Can you talk a little bit about this and the power behind it?
Well, I can kick that off simply by saying that, Craig is part of a coaching firm, and one of the things that my company does, we have a coaching arm. We've found that this is really critical, and this is not just to pitch coaching services. You can have accountability through a mentor. You can have it through, a buddy at your firm who is also in the same situation you're in, and that you guys sort of pledge to each other to meet once a month and check in with each other and look at each other's targets and encourage each other. The trouble is these informal structures typically are not very sustainable. So that's why professional coaches have a job. But that's also why I think within organizations there are sales teams, there are sales managers. The whole idea is, who are you reporting into so that not only can they give you some feedback, they can help to keep your focus and your momentum, but it's just very important to get out of your own head, get that self-talk, that inner monologue out into a dialogue with another human being so that they can offer other perspectives, other suggestions. Gosh, I know you sent 3 emails and they haven't returned any of those emails back to you, so maybe you should send an article, or maybe you should pick up the phone, or maybe you should see who else knows that person and try a different approach. A lot of this kind of creative discussion and thinking comes through coaching. So, I happen to believe that if you don't have some sort of coaching structure in your life, again, that can be a formal coach who you hire, or it can be someone informal who plays that role for you, then you really are putting a steep incline in front of yourself to get up this hill with no one to kind of help push you up the hill from behind. So I think it's really critical to have that structure, to have somebody who you respect, that you can talk to about these things, who you want to impress, and so you'll obviously push a little harder, because we're very good at talking ourselves out of things. But when we have somebody else there who's really rooting for us, that's a different scenario. I mean, I harken back to the old personal trainer analogy. When I hired personal trainers, and I still have one for working out, I go to the workout. I'm not going to give somebody money to help me work out and then just not show up. I'm not that much of a loser, and frankly I value my money too much. But when I don't have a personal trainer and I just use my willpower and tell myself, gotta get to the gym, I just don't go to the gym that much. I'll be the first to admit it. So I do think there's a lot to be said for having someone else who's going to hold one's feet to the fire.
Craig?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have had a personal trainer just once in my life, and if this were a live session, you would believe me. And I can remember that we'd set the appointment. The alarm would go off at 5 in the morning. The last place I wanted to be would be down at the gym, but because of my Puritan upbringing and knowing that my mother would be ashamed of me if I didn't keep an appointment, I'd get up and go down and see Fabio down at the gym. I already know how to do the push-ups and sit-ups. He didn't really help me that much with that, but the number one thing he did for me was he got me there because he set an appointment with me. And, I've been working with law firms for over 25 years. I'd like to think that I've learned a few things about how to motivate lawyers in that time, but the reality is probably 50% of our value is the firm has hired somebody, and he knows about your situation, he knows law firms, and you've agreed to meet with them on the phone, and you've agreed to get them a list or make some calls or do something. A big part of our practice is trying to instill habits, and having that accountability up front helps you to instill habits so that when you move away from a business development coach, the habits are in place, you're accountable to yourself, and you're able to move forward. And I think that's a big part of it, accountability.
I'm a tremendous believer in accountability, and I know what you do. You're both very good at what you do, and I also think, as you're saying, I think it's this accountability of closing the loop, and very good points about you talked about earlier, David, I think about the muscle and the habits. Those are really critical in terms of business development, and put the structure around it. So, well, thank you very much. Your thoughts, you gave me some great food for thought, and I'm sure that's true with everybody on the phone. I know that everybody listening today is committed to becoming a more robust rainmaker, and I know that they're going to be adding the tools and techniques that we discussed today to their rainmaking repertoire, and I know that they're going to get better rainmaking results. So I just want to say thank you very much. We'll take some questions now. We did have one question, and I know this requires there's not a yes or no answer, but somebody had asked, and I guess this goes to resiliency, about determining when no means keep working on it or move away to a better opportunity. And we just have a few minutes here, but if you could just maybe briefly address, each of you just briefly address your thoughts, that'd be fabulous. David, do you want to start?
Sure, I can take a first stab at that. I mean, if it really is no means no. It doesn't mean that the door is closed forever, but it certainly means back off for a while. What I find happens more often in business development is there really is no response, and then we interpret that to mean no, when in fact it probably means that the circumstances may have changed for the prospective client, or they are the decision is not solely theirs, and so they have to kick it up the ladder, and that's taking longer than expected, or there's another competitor in the running, and there's a lot of vetting that has to occur now. So it's really important to try to stay in dialogue with the prospective client. Now, of course, that's difficult if they're not being very communicative on their end. But I think that's where it's a good idea to have other ways of approaching the prospective client so that every time you reach out to them, they don't feel obligated to have to talk to you about something that they may not be ready to talk to you about yet. So it could be, hey, you know, I'm having an event, would love for you to come. It could be, hey, you know, I did some research and I spotted this piece of content that I really thought you would find helpful to help you reach your objectives. You know, you want to start to act as if you're already working for them and you're already helping them solve their problems, even in advance of them having hired you, because that just makes it a lot easier for them to enter into any dialogue. It doesn't matter what the dialogue is. Just keep the dialogue open, and then when the time is right, it'll segue back into, oh, and by the way, about that engagement we discussed, here's an update. But, you know, if the option is either talk to me about the status of the engagement or don't talk to me, then they're going to choose don't talk to me because they may not be ready to have that discussion. If, in fact, the prospective client has said, yeah, you know what, we decided to go in another direction, so thanks for your interest, but no, we're not going to engage you at this time, I would keep them on a tickler system, no problem, absolutely, I understand. You know, I'll be around if anything changes. And then, I don't know, once a quarter, once every 6 months, drop them a line. Could be something casual, could be a newsletter, could be a blog, could just be a, hey, I'm touching base, want to make sure you're still getting your needs met. You know, not trying to sell you anything here, just want to make sure that if anything changes, you know I'm here. There's nothing wrong with that because things do change and people do find themselves looking for alternative options every few years, and you know, you want to make sure that you haven't lost all of that goodwill that you've built up as you were pursuing them initially.
Okay.
Yeah, I think
you
know, a big part of what David's talking about is building the relationship, and if the relationship is strong enough, you rarely get a no, even when they decide to go a different direction, even when they decide to go with one of your competitors. Your attitude with them, you're so close to them, is I've been a part of this conversation all along, and you know what? There are some advantages to going to that competitor. Here they are, and maybe you want to do that, and if you do, fine. And then let's talk about all these other problems that you have and someone else that might be able to help you, whether it's me or somebody else. If you really take the attitude that I'm here to help you with your problems and solve problems, the person doesn't get on the phone and say, it's a no, we've gone with someone else. You're a part of that discussion and decision-making process, and you've built a relationship of trust, and you can move forward with them on that basis. I'm not saying that you want to simply quarterback all of your competitors to come work with your prospects, but I think if you're close enough to the prospect or the client, they rarely get on the phone and say we've gone another direction. You're in a continuing, as David says, a continuing dialogue with them. So if you do get what you consider is a no, and you crawl away into a hole, then they will consider you a more transactional relationship. He wanted to do something for us. We picked someone else, and now we're not going to talk to him anymore. But if you continue that dialogue, they will see that this is a more long-term relationship, and the fact that you went with someone else one time doesn't mean that I can't help you in the future, and I'm going to stay with you.
Okay, those are very, very good thoughts, and I especially with the main idea being just to keep that dialogue going. Craig and David, I want to thank you very much for your thoughts today. I'm sure everybody found it valuable, and I presume that you'll be available for people to email other thoughts, other questions. And
Absolutely.
I just want to say thank you very much, greatly appreciate it, and wish everybody happy rainmaking.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.